Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to start. This is actually moving. It's our first in-person local history talk, I think, in over a year and a half. So I'm pretty excited. I just want to remind everybody, I don't think I need to as I see you. Just keep your masks on and over the nose. So welcome to A Bronson Park Vision for All in Hudson by Alan Newman. I'm Brenda Schufelt. I'm the library's History Room Coordinator, and this event is part of our local history talk series. The Hudson Area Library has a history room dedicated to preserving and making accessible to the public the history of Hudson, Greenport, and Stockport. The history room's open to the public by appointment. Please email me or call the library to make an appointment. And there are online research requests for information that are available on our website. And also you can call and one of us will fill them out for you. That's a free service to the public. Anyone wishing to donate to the library's history room can visit our website, HudsonAreaLibrary.org, and go to our history room page, which is a tab at the top. And also, and there's where there is a donate button. And if you want to donate tonight, the proceeds will be split between Historic Hudson and the library. And there's a donation box that's right outside the door that you walked into. So I always discuss the upcoming events at the beginning, and you all have the one-page event list for October. So I won't go over them too much, except just generally. We have a Leisler event on October 7th. We always coordinate with them about 4 times a year. And these are really very particular, more of our academic talks. This one has a really long title: To Trade, Traffic, Buy and Sell as the Rest of the Inhabitants, Jewish Commercial and Communal Activities in Colonial New York. And it's by Noah Gelfand, and it's going to be very interesting. That will be a Zoom talk, so you just email me if you want to get the registration link. And then on October 8th, the next day, on a Friday, we have an event at Hudson Hall that Hudson Hall is holding the event and we're collaborating with them. Tony Coraldo is launching his new album and book, Hudson Ragtime Piano Suite. And he approached us about a year ago to do a history research of the 5 main streets of Hudson, which is Warren, Columbia State, and Allen. And he's written an original ragtime composition for each street based on their separate history, which they each do have a bit of a separate history. So it's going to be very interesting. There's going to be videos of local residents and historians, and also historic images of each of the streets. The tickets are $15, and you can get them on the Hudson Hall website. And then at the end of the month, Sunday, October 24th at 12 p.m., this is an in-person event in the cemetery. And it's our annual, this is the 5th year in a row that we've done this, Tales from Hudson Crypts, The Tour by Kelly Drahushik. And it is wonderful. And anyone who wants to be on the tour should definitely let me know tonight after the event, because it always is sold out. It's a free tour, but it is filled up immediately, and we always have a wait list that's actually longer than the number of people we can take. So, and especially now we're taking less as a group. So for tonight's event, this is actually our first collaborative event with Historic Hudson. But I'm proud to say that we consider Historic Hudson a partner organization. Gabriel Foster, Director of Development of Historic Hudson, will be introducing her organization and introducing tonight's speaker. I first met Gabriel when we coordinated our efforts to bid at an auction with Hudson historic items, and the auction went on for 8 hours on a Saturday, and it got very heated at times. And Gabriel and I will forever be bonded from that experience. We would send each other text messages back and forth about how to strategize the upcoming items, and we kind of helped each other maintain our motivation and our sanity. It was a little much. Gabriel Foster studied art history and Spanish at, how do you say that name?
Swanee.
Just Swanee? Oh, Swanee University in Tennessee, before eventually going on to pursue her master's work in historic preservation at Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, New York. She is inspired by the stories found within historic buildings and landscapes and how they contribute to the ongoing story of preservation, in particular through the lens of intangible heritage. In her role as Director of Development, Gabriel is focused on raising funds to engage Historic Hudson to take on larger projects while they continue to grow along with engaging Historic Hudson members and the larger community in the work of preserving and telling Hudson's unique history. So Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Brenda, for a lovely introduction. And I want to say thank you to all of you for making the time and coming out to hear this talk and to share in this vision with us. I joined Historic Hudson in December of last year after a particularly serendipitous meeting with Alan Newman. For 25 years, Historic Hudson has been advocating for the city of Hudson and its unique architecture and history. This work has resulted in the creation of 5 historic districts, the Historic Preservation Commission, and the designation of the Dr. Oliver Bronson House as a National Historic Landmark. It is my honor to be able to introduce you to Alan Newman tonight and to tell you a bit about him before he takes you through what promises to be an exceptional lecture. Alan Gray Newman is a preservation architect and architectural historian living and working in the Hudson Valley. A native of Des Moines, Iowa, he studied architecture at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis and studied historic preservation at Columbia University in the city of New York. He preserves historic buildings, researches them, looks closely at, and thinks daily about art, architecture, and landscape design. He was the co-curator with Janet S. Parks for the exhibition and accompanying catalog for a 1996 exhibition at Avery Architectural Library at Columbia University. The Old World Builds the New, the Guastavino Company and the Technology of the Catalan Vault, 1885 to 1962. The exhibition traveled to several cities in the US and abroad. Alan is a frequent lecturer for museum groups and trips from the US and abroad for the last 30 years. He is the president of Historic Hudson in Hudson, New York, which received the 2020 New York State Historic Preservation Award for Excellence in Historic Preservation Organizational Achievement. As a preservationist, he makes artisanal marmalade, Alan Gray's Seville Orange Marmalade with Scotch. In March 2020, received a silver medal at the World's Marmalade Awards at Dalemain House, Cumbria in England. Alan has been involved with the Bronson Project in Hudson for the last 24 years, and I cannot wait to hear more of the history and the beauty through your mind as you take us through this, Alan.
Thank you, Gabriel.
Move this
And
over.
Dalemain House is an historic house museum, and it's an historic marmalade recipe they started this world's competition with 30 years ago. Am I centered? I don't know.
I believe you are.
There's techniques here, and one moment before I start that. So, thank you, Gabriel, and it is a great pleasure having her in the Historic Hudson office. We have many adventures, and this evening I'm dedicating this talk to Timothy Dunleavy, our dear friend and founder of Historic Preservation. This was his dream. He was relentless, and all this man cared about in the world was bringing beauty into the world. He died 7 years ago in December. We miss him greatly, but this is his dream being fulfilled, and he would not give up. We're talking this evening about this brand new report. It's a 41-page report that we just published. It just came out this month. And in lieu of just going through the report, which is a vision of the future, this is a history room talk. So we're going to be going over the history of this exceptionally interesting and historic landscape. And this goes all the way back to the Native Americans several thousand years ago up to the present right now. I need to be able to see, sorry.
Yeah.
I have to read. Yes, that's perfect. And Historic Hudson was founded as a community-based organization in 1996 with the one idea that historic preservation matters. It matters in our community, it matters for our present, and we have to hand this on to the future. To that end, we've been working very, very hard on preserving one aspect of this, among our other projects, of this incredible Bronson landscape. And now I have to do my first punch. Correct. So we have discovered this house in 1997, right at the time the organization was founded. This was long hidden from view. A lot of you have been there. It's the Dr. Oliver Bronson House, originally built in 1811. Since 1919, it has been off the radar screen. It has been owned by New York State. And I have to remind all of you, everything we're talking about this evening is owned by the people of the state of New York. And that means you. And we have a say in this future. We put together a vision, actually many years ago, but we hired the landscape architects, Star White House landscape architects and planners to put together this report. We've been working on it for a year and a half. I thought I'd give you an overview here. This is the 163-acre parcel that is owned by the state of New York. It goes from 9G on your left, which is now also the Empire State Trail, to Route 9, which in Hudson is called Worth Avenue. That orange line at the bottom is the City of Hudson boundary. And this property goes up to the back of Union Street, to the railroad, and to Power Avenue. It's 163 acres owned by the people of the state of New York. We'll be talking more about this in detail, but you see its relationship to the urban grid and the city of Hudson. Star White House landscape architects. It's been a great pleasure working with them for the last year and a half. Our core team is Stephen Whitehouse, Gail Whitwer-Laird, and Chris Anderson, and it's been a great privilege to work with them. You might know of their work. They are currently under construction with the new entrance to the Prospect Hill, the park at the foot of Warren Street. It's drive by, take a look, it's underway. They have now opened an office at 553 Warren Street, and we see them frequently. We're at 541 Warren Street. This is a map drawn in 1972 by New York State. And I'll give you a bit of a background. The buildings on the left is a complex started in 1886 for the Women's House of Refuge. It was then became the New York Training School for Girls, and they were only on that lower plateau. Take a look on the right side, you'll see another plateau and open fields, and right there in the middle is the Bronson House, which we saw the photograph of earlier. These were separate then, and we're asking to go back to 1919 when New York State took over the part to the right, took over this private villa and incorporated it into the New York Training School for Girls. The New York Training School for Girls abandoned the house in 1970. By 1972, they were no longer having these institutions in New York State. So this went on the public market, actually the Columbia Green Community College was being formed and looked at purchasing it. Didn't. Damn. But it sat vacant for a while, and it then was taken over by the Hudson Correctional Facility. It is now a high security prison. We'll talk more about that. But this is an opportunity to look at these two plateaux and know that this has a long history with Native Americans. We have done 3 rounds of archaeology on the south side of the Bronson House in a much disturbed site over 200 years, and we found multiple Native American artifacts. They were here. In 1609, Henry Hudson's crew came to Hudson. They wrote about the population of 57 Mohicans, of 40 women and children and 17 men, and they grew corn, beans, and squash. What we do know is that these are the kinds of fields that were used, and all up and down the Hudson Valley, it's these fingers of land coming up to these fertile fields. If you're familiar with the town of Rhinebeck, where the Rhinebeck Library is, it's the same kind of field. Archaeology has been done there, and there's 7,500 years of Native Americans living and farming there. Just down the road here in Claverack at Spook Rock Road, we know there's archaeology of 3,500 years. I personally feel terrible that I live in this community and there's no place to go to learn and understand of those who lived here for thousands of years. This park is an opportunity for that. We also have another layer. Jan van Hosen buys this land as a patent in 1662, and very quickly the Van Rensselaers challenged it in court, saying we already bought that. It was challenged for 5 years, and it was determined that he owned it. It is Stockport, part of Stockport, what is now Hudson, and a great deal of Greenport. He buys in 1662. He's a baker in Albany. What is he growing here? Wheat. We don't know when this Dutch farmhouse was built, and we don't know when this Dutch barn was built, but certainly after 1667. But we do know in 1704, when Van Hosen splits up the estate and partitions it among his children, one of them inherits the land south of the wagon road to the river, which is spelled with 2 G's, which today we call Partition Street. And that was this, and that partitioning included a farmhouse, barn, and orchard. And here in the plan, you can see them. They're right on the side of the City of Hudson line. These are owned by the people of the state of New York, but they are on the grounds of a high security prison. And we'll talk more about these. One other thing we know about the house is in 1970, when the main house was let go by New York State, they moved the prison superintendent's family into what the young woman who we talked to calls the Dutch farmhouse. She lived here from the age of 15 to the age of 18. She describes the low ceilings, the large wooden beams, the wide board floors, the tiny windows, and the handmade iron hardware. It was an intact Dutch house. I can tell you a current employee of Hudson Correctional said, well, I moved in there with my family in the early 1990s. That old thing, that's a 1930s bungalow moved onto the site. We think it's been gutted, but it is indeed an historic treasure. This barn we'll talk about later, but the Dutch barns were distinctive of having that square barn door running straight through, which you can see in that lower photo. Historic Hudson has never had access to the interior until this photograph was taken in October of 2020. So we don't have access to walk around these buildings. We don't have access to walk in them, and it's a long story you'll hear more By 1799, when the great Penfield map was drawn, and if you haven't seen the map in person, it's up on the wall at the Columbia County Historical Society. It's moving to see. It's under glass with a drape. But if you look down below, you see the windmill on the right, look to the left, and you will see the barn, the farmhouse, and the orchard mentioned in 1704. So it was here 14 years after the city was founded. You can see the grid of the streets, South Bay, North Bay, and why this was such a great port that was founded as a city in 1785. And there is the City of Hudson boundary right there. So by 1824, this wonderful view of Hudson was done. You can see these large open fields. This is from across the river, and this is part of the Hudson River portfolio, a magnificent set of 24 prints done by William Guy Wall, who traveled from the Adirondacks down to New York Harbor. And in 1819, we know he was here and he was making this drawing. He also made this drawing, and it was not executed for the Hudson River portfolio, but this is the only known image we have of the house the way it was built in 1811 by a man named Samuel Plum. Samuel Plum buys a farm in 1811, and it's open all the way down to the river. If you look closely, you can see Mount Marino, and that road on the left is what's today's Route 9G, then called Bay Road. And in front, you can see what is now Worth Avenue. By 1819, it was the Highland Turnpike. Here's a close-up. You can see what is here today still, the third floor distinctive, what's called a tempietto. The Italians were famous for this. It had a very narrow east porch, and look at the distinctive buildings on either side. They are called side flankers. They were outbuildings. This is a style from Andrea Palladio from 16th century Italy. Palladio wrote in his books, and the style Palladianism comes from him. If you take a look to see the land, the large outline is the land of 263 acres purchased by Samuel Plum, and the smaller red and green parcel was sold in 1838 to a man named Dr. Oliver Bronson. And Dr. Oliver Bronson and his wife, Joanna Bronson Donaldson, were young. They were extremely rich, and they had a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and one on the way. Joanna Donaldson Bronson had a very famous brother, Robert Donaldson. He was the great patron of the arts in New York and in America from the 1820s to the 1850s. He had purchased a house in the country, what's now on the grounds of Bard College. He renamed the property from Annandale to Blythewood, a more romantic name. He hires a young architect named Alexander Jackson Davis, and they start dreaming and imagining of a new way of looking at the land at Blythewood. There are watercolors. It's very well documented, lots of drawings. But Mr. Donaldson, and you can just hear the Sunday lunch, is like, darling, my younger sister, you need a house in the country. I'll help you find one. Indeed, the Bronsons buy this property. There is a letter that exists from Robert Donaldson to Oliver Bronson saying, I thank you. I'd like to introduce you to this young architect, Alexander Jackson Davis. He will help you improve the property. A letter also exists once they had the commission from Robert Donaldson to the architect, by then a good friend, saying, I'd like to introduce you to a landscape garden designer named Andrew Jackson Downing. I think you two should work on my sister's property. Indeed, they did. This is the site where these two creative minds met. Why we know that is there's a canceled check at the New York Public Library signed by Oliver Bronson, and it is written to the Downing Nurseries for $100, which is about 1,000 trees and shrubs, a very large order today. So what Davis does is he takes this open land and he transforms it, a picturesque transformation. He adds shade, shadow, light, dark, this extraordinary east veranda, much deeper. He adds eaves and shadows and these distinctive drop acorn brackets, and up above the vertical octagonal brick chimneys and the octagonal terracotta. Here is a rendering by the scholar Peter Watson, sort of putting this computer simulation together, seeing how he made it picturesque. And what does that mean? He's adding all of this ornament. We own all of these pieces, and we have one of each of all of the pieces of the ornament to be able to replicate that east veranda. But this is Davis's business card. He calls himself an architectural composer, and note his office hours from 12 until 2 o'clock. Right down on Exchange Place, where he is right now near Wall Street. Oh, and the business card's about that large, extremely elegant. And he had just started out on his own. He had never, to the end of his days, never left the United States. He was a partner with Ithiel Town, the great engineer, a very rich engineer who made a fortune on the town trusts, which every covered bridge in America had 2 of them. And he was a great collector of books. Ithiel Town traveled throughout Europe. He would send cases of books back, and this young architect had access to the finest architectural library in America. And we have an inventory, and we know what Davis was reading. An architectural composer, the picturesque. You have to understand this landscape as we think about this park. The landscape and the buildings were one. It was one picture. We have not found, I've never seen a drawing by Davis without its landscape context. So not an architect, but an architectural composer. This is a drawing of that's in the Avery Architectural Library in the Davis Archives of what became the West Front expansion in 1849 by Davis, but always a composition. And if you take a look at this British gentleman in the 18th century looking at a mirror, he was looking back at a landscape and composing a picture. And it was taking the picturesque literally as making pictures. It's that basic. The landscape became formed. You would build these little pavilions, sometimes build picture frames, and you would gaze at the scenes you'd created and call them gazebos. In sort of faux Latin, I will gaze. We call them gazebos. But this is indeed what is called a clawed glass. I made this one. It's a back-painted convex mirror. It's meant for concentrating the contrasts of clouds, making your paintings look much like Claude Lorraine, the 17th century painter. Most painters had these. Very few exist because no one knew what they were. Painters didn't talk about them. You sometimes see them called witches' glasses or black mirrors, but this is a clawed glass. And this is what Davis did for Robert Donaldson at Blythewood. This is a window. He's taking this idea of the picturesque literally. We have the drawing for this. However, it was originally installed vertically opposite a door. We know where it was facing, an ancient tree. But we have the drawings for this extraordinary picture window. You can see a moving branch, and if you look closely, you see the Hudson River, the Sawkill, and a piece of land that is Montgomery Place today, the next door estate. The watercolor on the right is at Avery Library. It is of Blythewood. It is what was built on that house. And you see again, framing a view, building this deep veranda, interacting, enjoying the landscape. It's a new way of looking at America. On the left is the Bronson House today. Take a look at that veranda. Take a look at that ceiling. Sister, brother. The one on the left was done a full 4 years before the one on the right. And so this is a framed view. This is the floor plan of the house. You see the house originally was 4 rooms downstairs. This extraordinary series of 3 parlors with an octagon at each end was added by Davis in 1849. But if you look on the left side, looking south on that octagonal bay, this is what Davis did. The entire triple set of parlors is centered on the chimney of that Dutch farmhouse. Pretty interesting. I can tell you that we learned in the year 2000 from a preliminary landscape report, the Bronsons didn't buy that farmhouse and 24 acres. And as an architect, I can tell you there was a conversation with the architect saying, you have to buy that house. I'm centering the whole addition on it. And I've checked, it is indeed centered on that window. So picturesque, taken literally. This is that extraordinary from the drawing to the house. This is an 1880s view, an ornamental veranda. The drop acorns cast acorn-shaped shadows against the house, light, dark. This extraordinary park view we will restore. Just last year, we did archaeology and we found that gravel driveway 16 to 20 inches underground. In one test pit, one of the guys called out, he saw the crown of the gravel and a carriage wheel impression on it. It's like sort of spine tingling. This is what we have today. Historic Hudson has restored 41 historic windows. New York State enclosed it and we've taken the glass off, but we will be restoring this. And this is a photo taken last October. We call this the $64,000 view. I mean, it really is extraordinary. This is the 1811, 1812 original staircase, though the handrail was replaced in the 1870s. And it goes straight up that tower. The barn. So Peter Watson, a wonderful scholar of this property, has spent a lot of time at Avery Library looking through the day books, etc. Is convinced, and he had a theory, that those 2 side flankers you saw from the 1819 were actually moved to the side of this barn. Davis then making it picturesque in the landscape. If you see those verticals on the right, those are brackets, light, shade, shadow. One architectural historian, Jane B. Davies, says these are the first brackets used in America. They're typical now. You've heard of Hudson River bracketed. It was a style all across the country. This is where the idea starts. We have never had an opportunity to go inside before last year. Here's a view looking out towards Worth Avenue and the fields. But this is the extraordinary interior. You see that pear. It's interesting that this is a Dutch form barn and the framing seems to be of an English type, so it makes it truly American. We don't know its age, but it's not difficult to do what's called dendrochronology and age this along with the house. But take a look on the right. If you see that light outline, that is the side flanker. And if one can look closely, there's one side of barning. This is the old house, or the old side flanker brought up to the barn by Davis, and quite exciting. And we can date that wood. And there again on the left, you see those exquisite nature-inspired brackets. The Bronsons leave in 1854, and a man by the name of Folger buys the property, owns it for 10 years, and builds this lower gatehouse. It's right off of 7th and Union Streets. Peter Watson has located this design in an 1861 plan book. Mr. Folger sells by 1864, so probably built out the designs of the plan book. It was just near the railroad tracks at 7th and Union Streets, and it disappeared suddenly 4 years ago, and the Hudson Correctional Facility tore it down and said, that old thing, and it's part of the National Historic Landmark. We need a new steward for this property. We have documentation of this house. This is taken from the National Historic Landmark nomination, but tragic. There was another owner after Folger, a very interesting woman named Mary Whitney Phoenix. She owns it from, oh, I have the dates here. What were her dates? She owns it from 1864 to 1883. She is the daughter of Stephen Whitney, the founder of the Whitney, New York fortune. She's extremely rich. She builds this gatehouse in the 1870s, and she is the one who replaces the handrail with a more Victorian side. She is also of interest in Hudson for part of our history. The Phoenix Firehouse is funded by Mary Whitney Phoenix, and also her grandson, a very famous architect named Whitney Warren, who went to the École des Beaux-Arts in Paris. He started the firm of Warren and Wetmore. He designed Grand Central Terminal, the New York Yacht Club, and the courthouse here in Hudson, as well as the bank on 6th and Warren Street. So she was an important part of the city of Hudson. This house then is sold in 1883 to two unmarried sisters, Elizabeth and Matilda McIntyre. You can see this aerial view from 1881. It's actually owned by the Hudson Area Library, and they graciously allowed us to do a digital scan of this part. But on the lower part, you see the orange outline is what we are proposing for the future Bronson Park. At that very center, you see around it is where the Bronson House is. Note, however, it's open farmland all the way down in 1881, and it is these sisters who sell that off to create the Women's House of Refuge. This is Elizabeth and Matilda McIntyre. This is one of the roads we found, and if you can't quite see, but on the left is the east veranda. So they're on the side of the house, a private park. They lived there in grace and style. Their family made a fortune in the Adirondacks in mining. Very interesting women. And this is what they founded. And there's a story. They sold this land for the Women's House of Refuge. We just don't know the origin story. But here is that campus, built what was an open field. If you look beyond, you see the Hudson River. These buildings to the right and left and the church remain. However, the building in the middle with the tower was lost to fire. Oops. This is the Hudson Correctional Facility today. And this on the right was when it was sold to the New York Training School for Girls. It looks like an elegant women's college. These beautiful quads. And note in the center, you see a church steeple. That is the Universalist Church on 5th and Warren Streets. So you get a sense of the proximity of this campus to the city. Fast forward to 1972. This is our dear friend, Dick Jenrette, a nationally important preservationist, a legend on Wall Street. He buys his beloved Edgewater on the edge of the Hudson River in Barrytown in Red Hook in 1968 from the author Gore Vidal. He becomes obsessed with the history of the house. Robert Donaldson had sold Blythewood to buy Edgewater in 1852. hires the young architect Davis to make it picturesque. Dick becomes familiar with this Bronson house, starts researching the Donaldsons, the Bronsons. He owns the portraits of Oliver and Joanna, and he finds out the house is scheduled for demolition in a fire department training exercise in 1972. And damn it, he won't have that. So he hires Jane B. Davies to write what is surrounding here, the National Register nomination. And in February 1973, it's checkmate New York State. You cannot tear down a National Register property. So when he died in 1982, we pinned this up, but this is the gray a panel of plywood with the vent down below and the plexiglass window that was up for 27 years. Every time, and Dick loved this place, he would come always once a year after Sunday lunch, bring friends, and was a very proud godfather of this. And always on Monday, dated on the Monday afterwards, he'd send a nice check and love what we were doing at the Bronson property. But he is one of our godfathers, and he saved this. By April of 1998, those of you who are familiar with Worth Avenue, this large plant was built right in the town of Greenport, immediately adjacent to this, and it was built for the Kaz factory. Those of you who know the Kaz plants down near the waterfront, 3 of those warehouses were recently torn down. They moved from there to this. Kaz has since moved to Mexico. It's now Flanders. But this is an orientation. That large white square there in the town of Greenport was built in April of 1998. And if you take a look on the left of that large green area, we're pleased to report that the Scenic Hudson Land Trust purchased that 79 acres in February of 2020 for a public access park. When one combines these two, it's 202 acres right in walking distance to the City of Hudson. So we'll talk more about that. But, and I tell the folks at Scenic Hudson, if that factory were on 9G in front of Alana, it would be gone by now, comma. June of 1998, dear Timothy Dunleavy, it's a long story he loved to tell, but suffice it to say he overhears in a bar a celebration that in June 8th of 1998, this law had passed the New York State Senate, and they'd lined up all the votes in the assembly to do it, to sell off the land of the Bronson property for industrial development. It's true. And if you read the fine print, it says it's not necessary to our operations. We need to sell it for public benefit. This is what Historic Hudson galvanized in April of, in June of 1998, right? Yes, 1998, sorry. All these dates. But should this intact 19th century landscape, scenic landscape, become an industrial park? This went up, all up and down Warren Street. It galvanized this community. It's dateable, but they say 150 faxes rolled into Albany. The state assembly member and senator said, well, we never heard any objections. Well, of course we won't let this happen. So Historic Hudson stopped this land from being developed. Our dear friend, Carrie Haddad, was on the board of Historic Hudson then. She loves to tell the story of the then mayor. Says, well, Carrie, what do you want? She goes, easy, just change one word. Get rid of the word industrial. We want park. So that is when Historic Hudson started saying, okay, let's have a park. This drawing we commissioned is dated the year 2000, May of 2000. It's like, here's an idea. The area in green and yellow was what was owned by Bronson. You can see it's separate from the Hudson Correctional Facility over there. And we started the conversation. Let's get a lease on it. We need to restore this house. It's falling apart. No. So by 2000 to 2003, Historic Hudson funded research and advocated and finally got a National Historic Landmark designated. This large squiggle outline is 55 acres surrounding the main house. It was designated on the birthday of Alexander Jackson Davis. And what is a National Historic Landmark? Our friend and neighbor Franklin Roosevelt said, indeed, and he wrote these words in 1935, to set aside properties of exceptional significance in telling the story of the nation. And he had a gift for words. You've heard of National Register properties. That came about with an act of 1966, and they're properties of local, regional, and statewide significance. So we're very proud of this designation, and it isn't just the house, it is the 55 acres, but you might see down below, the Dutch farmhouse was not included because the then Secretary of the Interior, Gail Norton, under George W. Bush, didn't want to be criticized for designating a 1930s bungalow. But there's still time. We're proud of this designation, this bronze plaque that was put in front, and I'll quote a line from this designation from the plaque, that this inspired and defined the picturesque movement in America. That is why it's of exceptional significance in telling the story of this nation. Everything changed with this site. America started looking at landscape aesthetically instead of functionally. Classically, of that White House landed like a spaceship on the open land, to integrating, sitting in a veranda, appreciating it. It was a new way of looking at America. Our painters, about 10 years earlier, had been looking at landscapes in 2 dimensions. This takes it into the 3rd dimension with architecture and landscape. This is what the Secretary of the Interior was looking at. And the National Park Service staff really went to bat for this and said, this is too important. Historic Hudson tried for 10 years to get a lease. We could not put a tarp on the roof. It was literally collapsing. We finally succeeded in getting a lease, but only on the house and 1.223 acres. It is a donut hole. Every time we access it, we have to have a 48-hour request to the Hudson Correctional Facility, sign in with the names of those visiting, including workmen, and sign out. That is how we were able to save this house. And this is what we inherited on the left, and this is the same view on the south. We're very proud of this. Historic Hudson has spent $1.6 million. We're not a rich organization, successfully saving the patient. On the right is the last piece of our 10-year conservation stabilization plan. We have the funding in place, and we have the drawings underway and approved, and it's about ready to start in the spring to finish that. In 2011, the City of Hudson put together a local waterfront revitalization plan and very specifically called out this large green space is necessary for the City of Hudson as we make future plans for open space. So this is coming directly from the City of Hudson, and you can see the scale of that with our present parks in that era. This is from our report. If you see those concentric circles, the outer one is the 4-mile radius, and you can see 3 National Historic Landmarks: the Thomas Cole House, the Olana State Historic Site, and the Dr. Oliver Bronson House and Estate. They're thematically linked. They are all close to the Amtrak, and it is something we are looking at to link this in the Hudson Valley, and their going from north to south is the Empire State Trail that comes right through Hudson. To give you an idea, the orange is the National Historic Landmark. The very center, the belly button, is our 1.23 acres. The correctional facility actively uses that gray area. This gives you an orientation with the City of Hudson. We look at this with the scenic Hudson land, and you can see the scale and size of this to our city. And as we say, we don't have enough green space. We put in our report, and I'll read it to you. How do you talk to a politician about this? The World Health Organization has established standards for outdoor recreational space in urban areas. 96 square feet per person is the minimum standard for human health, with an ideal minimum of 538 square feet per person. 96 square feet, smaller than a 10 by 10 bedroom. The City of Hudson presently has 33.25 acres of outdoor recreational space in 11 parks, or 232 square feet per person, about half of the ideal standard. With the addition of this much needed 123 acre Bronson Park in Hudson, there would be 1,092 square feet per person. Our community needs to strive to meet and exceed those minimum standards, and we do. This is from the Route 9G at the bottom. Looking up, you can see that plateau we saw in the earlier topography or topographical map. That is the active use on the plateau. Off to the left, you see much separated the Bronson House. There is the orange City of Hudson boundary, town of Greenport, and the land to the right is that was purchased by the Scenic Hudson Land Trust. Our landscape architects very creatively looked at this wetlands here and said, this is ideal for boardwalks and environmental education in wetlands. Indeed, we have nothing for our community or in the mid-Hudson Valley. There are some beautiful boardwalk areas further south on the Hudson. This is an idea for transforming this as a public access park. This is extraordinary land. This is part of that wetland up above. We have these deep gorges down below. There is a freshet, a spring-fed pond. This is all in the City of Hudson boundaries in walkable distance to people without access to cars. And that is people who live here, but also people who visit by Amtrak. All of you see the suitcases rolling up. There is no accessible large green open space. We need this. What did I just skip by? So when we talk of a park for all, I actually took these at a park I often walk in. It's called Poets Walk Park. It's in the town of Red Hook, right off of the Kingston-Rhinecliff Bridge. The Scenic Hudson Land Trust purchased it, created this park. It is the most used park of all of the parks of the Scenic Hudson Land Trust. Why is that? Well, one, it's right off the bridge. There are people who stop and walk on the way to and the way from work every single day, but it is accessible to all. Those wheel marks are from, if you look on the left, it's 3 generations of a family out taking a walk in the sun. It's stroller friendly, it's walker friendly, it's elderly friendly. A lot of parks in America are designed for 15 to 50-year-olds. We need parks for the young and for the old, and our city needs this. We opened this after we negotiated quite strenuously. Last year, we got permission to bring the public into that lower carriage trail on October 25th on a beautiful Sunday for 4 hours. You don't talk about a park. We were working with the landscape architects. It's let's show the park, and we moved the picnic tables out and brought the public in, and it was really an experience. It's also in our book, and I won't focus on this, but we've looked at financial models And what is the ask of New York State? There are many different models for this, but the state of New York does not want to run a park here. What we must do is, within Historic Hudson, form an organization that raises the funds to build the capital improvements, to build parking lots and trails, to manage the park, and then to work creatively for ongoing income. So we have actually, our team at Star White House interviewed and looked at publicly available financial data of the Alana Partnership, the Thomas Cole House, Manitoga, lower down on the Hudson, Fairmount Park Conservancy in Philadelphia, the Franny Reese Park owned by the Scenic Hudson Land Trust, and the Hancock Shaker Museum. They did a lot of analysis, and this is how we're starting to look at what organization we need to form to be able to move forward with this park. So this is back to this initial image and this initial image or initial vision. And I have a quote from one of my heroes, Daniel Burnham. He is the guy who imagined the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. And he is famous for saying, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood, and probably themselves will not be realized. Make big plans, aim high in hope and work, remembering that our noble, logical diagram once recorded will never die, but long after we are gone, will be a living thing, asserting itself with ever-growing insistency." And one of my age contemporaries, we're born a month apart, is the inimitable Steve Jobs of Apple Computer. And he says, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." So we are looking to do something big here for the city of Hudson. It is possible. This is owned by the people of the state of New York. This is our dream. Our mission statement starts with a question: what makes our city livable? But this is a quote, which I'm sorry you can't read on the screen, but I will read for you. Our archaeologists found this in the Hudson Daily Star, 1st of October, 1859, 162 years ago. And it so goes: "A more charming spot could not have been found. Entering the grounds from the railroad near 7th Street, a good graveled walk leads through the woods to the residence of Mr. Folger. Passing over a long rustic bridge and ascending a small hill, you come to a tower commanding a splendid view of Hudson and its surroundings. Just below the hill is a grove admirably adapted for a playground, and here the children and their friends assembled spent the day singing, swinging, laughing, romping, and eating. At 4 o'clock, the school formed in procession and counter-marched in front of the mansion of their kind host, singing a farewell song and thanking him for the pleasure afforded them. Then they passed through the charming flower garden and so homeward, feeling that a happier picnic can be enjoyed in such a delightful place in Hudson than could have been found by a long ride or a sail to seek it elsewhere. And that happiness is not to be measured by the amount of money spent to purchase it." So we at Historic Hudson now have a defined vision. We are looking to the community. We need deep pockets to help us to fund this, to demand it of our public, and this is possible. The time for this is right now. Our community needs this, and this is social justice and environmental justice, and it is something that we can accomplish as a community. So thank you, and there's time, I believe, time for questions, and we're committed to this. And you can see Historic Hudson hasn't walked away. We've been thrown outright body blocks over the years, but any?
So Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we'll take questions, and I think Gabriel will come up also. And wow, that was moving. I'm thinking of all.
Our community is moving,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and this only happened with our community's help and the dream of Timothy Dunphy. So,
So does anyone have any questions or any comments?
how are we going to do this?
Yeah.
With perseverance. Anyway, we have had a lot of conversations with New York State, really gearing it up since about 2012. This is not a pipe dream. This is a real conversation we are having with New York State Parks. You should know our last commissioner, Rose Harvey, came to visit with our assembly member, Dee Dee Barrett, a number of years ago, and said, I love this project. She reviewed our grants and said, but we can't take 1 more square foot or spend 5 more cents. No, thank you. That was March. By August of that year, she was actually on a phone call that several other people joined in and called the commissioner of Department of Corrections and said, the people of the state of New York need this park. How can you and I make it happen? And then she left office. It is an idea that is out there. Our present commissioner is, of course, overwhelmed, but is spent his whole career connecting parks to people. And we need to form an organization. We need to raise the funds so that it is something that can be talked about. And we were unable to do that without this document, which we have just put out. So.
Is your document available at the library or for others to peruse?
You know, you just said something interesting. I think we'll make one available at the library. It's expensive for us to print. And Gabriel and I were talking about making them available for sale, but we are trying to get this into the hands of deep-pocketed donors to say, we're with you. Let's, and we have several steps that we are planning, but we'll make one available. Actually, this copy, because it's clean. Yeah, and please do come. We are planning to, you know, they're expensive to print, but have them for sale, but we just don't have enough yet.
In the back?
That was wonderful. Thank you for the presentation. So how much money are you talking when you say the funds?
Well, the very next step, this was an effort to define what the ask is. We actually, you know, you can't look at an arm wave. Now we know. And the next step is we need to fund a financial planning study. Okay, what will it cost to restore that barn? What will it cost to bring in utilities? What will adaptive reuse? It's a perfect facility for events. It will cost a capital improvement. What will it cost to manage this park? And what kind of revenue can we see streaming? We are talking with Star White House. We're getting an estimate to do this next study, but it's several $100,000 so that we can raise that to say, okay. And, you know, if you do read the report, Star White House has carefully looked at it as 4 potential phases, and we could start slow, but we want to, you know, we'll have to raise millions. And my older brother says, Alan, it's just money, raise it. but it is, and we now know where we're headed, and we don't have a financial roadmap yet.
Any other questions? Do you have any fundraisers?
We will be, but you know, there's something called COVID running around. I do wish to report that we have gotten permission to open it again this October 24th. We are partnering with a group here in Hudson called the 10th, and we're bringing in a whole other new community. And this year, we're actually having 4 food trucks. So it'll be fun. Hopefully a beautiful weather on a Sunday afternoon in October. This report is out. We want people to come see what we collectively own as the people of the state of New York. Yep.
What happens to Native American artifacts as they're discovered?
So it's so interesting. All 3 pieces of archaeology, all of the artifacts are safely stored, and they are in amongst. And I think each one had 1 or 2 artifacts, very few, but identifiable. We haven't dated them, but that's why I'm so fascinated. We really want to do the archaeology here. I mean, in Rhinebeck, they've done significant digs in 7,500 years of living on a very similar piece of land. It is possible to do a core sample through the soil and find out what plants were grown and when. You know, we have, was it indeed corn, beans, and squash? The one exciting thing is we have maps from New York State, our Department of Environmental Conservation. The soils right here on these fields are something called soils of statewide significance. They're exceptionally fertile. Well, could it be man-made soil of stewarding the land for several thousand years and improving it? It's something we talk about today of organic agriculture and improving the soil. We have something here we can study and actually learn a great deal from. And there's more work to do, but we don't have them sitting in a box. They sit at the New York State Museum, and they're all labeled. And we found some interesting artifacts. We had a dig with 20 test pits around the house this August of 2020. It's a problem if you're an archaeologist with distancing to put everybody in one hole. We were able to do 20 test pits around to try to determine the historic topography around this house. Indeed, we're pretty sure that New York State just kept filling and leveling, and it's 18 to 20 inches in most places around the house. So there's so much more scholarship needed here, and this is the mission of Historic Hudson, to engage the public and to learn about, this is our history. And look, this is in our city. And it tells a lot about our city, but a lot about our past. Yeah.
You keep referencing the New York State citizens ownership. Would it make sense, or where is the city's involvement? Because it sounds like you're trying to do a land grant from one government body to a public or a private. Would it not be easier to go New York State?
Well, I'll fill you in, and it's actually a great question. And there is legislation in New York State that one state agency can transfer underutilized property to another state agency for 2 signatures, one of each commissioner. This land can transfer for no funding to the Parks Department. Their mission is to make parks accessible. They're not interested in funding and running a park, but that is what we have, these public-private partnerships happening all over New York State. We have precedent, and it is something that is done. 2, Gabriel and I met Mayor Kamal Johnson and up at the site with Michael Hoffman to give them a copy of this report. And they were very excited. You know, this is like, how can we help you? And we have, every year that we've been involved on this property, we have had a letter from successive mayors saying that they are supportive of this park, supportive of this Bronson property, because it's a hard dictum. No politician in Albany will touch anything if the local municipality objects. And we have great cooperation over the years, and I've had a wonderful tour through with the present mayor. So
where's the bottleneck?
pardon me?
Where's the bottleneck? You're describing something.
Oh, well, first of all, I mean, I mean, first of all, we need to have an organization ready to say we're ready for the transfer. There's all kinds of politics about the Hudson Correctional Facility. And we have another issue, which I wasn't going to bring up, but I will. Part of our problem since we signed our lease is there is an open air firing range that fires 3 afternoons a week at the Bronson House from just down below. They have been firing there for 45 years. We do not have access to the site when the firing range is active. And for the first 8 years of our lease, 9 years of our lease, it was April, May, and June. We figured out how to not work on the house. Contractors could start July 1 and work through typically to the end of the year, and we made it work. The Hudson Correctional transitioned into a high security facility. I don't know how many of you know that the governor handed down a dictum that we would house 16 and 17-year-old violent offenders here. We were one of only 3 states that incarcerated young people with adults. And he said, this cannot happen. This was transformed what was I saying? Something about?
Well, because of the fire range, it was just till June. But
and so suddenly they needed it from April to October, 6 months out of the year. And it's very difficult for us to administer a contract and only 6 months out of the year, which are winter. We fortunately or unfortunately had archaeology, which we could slip in. We fortunately or unfortunately have run into more hazardous materials and asbestos, and it set us back another 1.5 years. But when they finally came to remove the asbestos, it had to be done on a weekend. It cost us a lot more. So we are working with state government. It's a long conversation that's been underway to try to close and relocate this firing range to somewhere else that is convenient for these workers, and also possibly for other security individuals.
professionals.
So I don't know.
Security.
The other offices in Columbia County, and it is a conversation that's underway. We have a $650,000 New York State grant underway, and we're worried, and we had a meeting today, how we're going to be doing this. It is part of how you can't have a park with this. It's part of a conversation. You can see we've been working with this for 25 years. We're not going anywhere, as they say, and nevertheless, they persisted. So it is a conversation, and it was this afternoon.
It was.
So thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for your interest.